Welcome to the Center for Independent Studies. My name is Hartwich. I'm a research fellow here at the center. And today we have a special guest here all the way from Montreal in Canada. We've got Jacob Levy. Welcome to the center.
Thank you.
Now you're a political scientist and you're an expert on this guy over here, Friedrich Hayek, one of our great liberal saints. But from what I understand, you're quite critical really of Hayek's political philosophy, and you say that he somehow took early liberal ideas and applied them to economics where they're not quite appropriate. Is that right?
That's a little harsher than I would put it. I've learned a great deal from Hayek as a liberal theorist and from a thinker about the past of liberalism. But I think that there are some confusions that Hayek introduced by way of projecting his own ideas as a whole more firmly back into the history of liberal thought than is fully appropriate. Hayek himself, as an economic theorist, is the 20th century's great theorist of spontaneous order and of finding that social orders are self-organizing and economic orders are self-organizing without needing to be directed from above. He's also, in legal theory, an important theorist about law as an emergent order, and in political theory and political philosophy, a critic of the nation-state and an enthusiast of more decentralized and more federalized kinds of political order. In the history of liberal thought, those ideas didn't all always go together. And sometimes it was right that they didn't go together, because they do sometimes all operate at cross purposes to one another. But in an especially influential chapter in the Constitution of Liberty, and then elsewhere in a succession of essays and reviews published especially over the course of the 1940s and 50s, Hayek offered a sketch of a history of liberal ideas in which he more or less looked for the people in the past who reminded him of one or another of his three ideas that I just described, and assumed that they therefore shared all of them.
So you're saying that basically Hayek only saw the past through the lens of the present, of his present? Yes. That's not always a criticism in itself, to look for the history of an idea that you think is especially important and interesting. That's one of the things that we often do as intellectual historians. And as long as you remember to sometimes look through the other eye and let the past speak for itself, that's not a grave sin. But he thought that his thought as a whole was more tightly integrated than can be borne out through the intellectual history. And he didn't let himself see some of the conflicts, some of the potential tensions among his various ideas. And it led him to see the history of liberal thought as more sharply divided between, well, his heroes who were the precursors of him and his villains who were not the precursors of him than the history will actually bear. Tonight I want to talk about some of the ways that the ideas can be pulled apart in ways that Hayek didn't, but the actual history of liberal ideas does. It's often said that if you really want to understand Hayek, you need an interpreter almost to understand Hayek. But from what I understand, what you say is actually that Hayek himself would have needed some kind of interpreter to understand himself.
I think that's right. I think that Hayek had a set of ideas that were powerful ideas, but he did not necessarily understand the relationships among them. He saw them as a tightly integrated whole, and there's important truth to that, and that allowed him to carry a system of thought forward.
Is that because Hayek was first and foremost an economist, even when he engaged in political philosophy?
I don't think so. I think that it's more that he was a methodologist of social thought and social science. What I'm seeing as the master idea that governed everything else is his critique of rationalist modes of knowing, work that penetrated his philosophy of mind, his philosophy of social science, and his economics, and his political philosophy.
Now, the other thing that interests me is that it's often said that Hayek's own work and Hayek's own thought really changed, because, I mean, that's unavoidable for a career that spans 7 decades. Has that actually changed in Hayek's own thought? Are there interpretative differences in Hayek's work from the 1940s and 1970s and 80s, for example?
There's a break that I would see between the 1930s and what came after. Some people
see this as being the influence of Popper. I have no view of my own about where it came from. But the importance that Hayek placed on the critique of rationalism and on the importance of evolved modes of knowledge, the importance that he placed on the information problem and how much that gave him an evolutionary story about the uses of information and knowledge in society. I think that that took on an importance for him in the post-war world.
But that started in his famous essay 1937 in Economica, isn't it?
It started there, but it wasn't the dominant theme.
And it was before Popper actually came up with the idea, wasn't it?
As I said, I've heard other people say that this is something to do with the relationship with Popper, and I don't have a view of my own.
It's fascinating. So we're looking forward to hearing you speak later, and you will find that video, of course, on the website where we'll have further information on Hayek, of course. And we look forward to seeing you again at the Center for Independent Studies. Thank you very much, and thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.